Okay. All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Aware Athlete Show. Today we've got a great interview with a special guest, and this interview will cover a very important subject, and that subject is the difference between life fitness and physical fitness. So, we're fortunate and pleased to have with us today Dr. Rachel White Galvin. And Rachel is a doctor of musical arts, viola performance, also a CrossFit level 2 coach, and a Feldenkrais practitioner. So we're going to have the privilege today of finding out how you combine those three things. And so thank you so much for being here, Rachel.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Scott.
All right. So let me ask you a few questions.
Please.
Okay. So you actually have a fascinating story because you combine so many different areas of life here. So you're an artist, a fitness trainer, and a Feldenkrais practitioner. So I think our audience will be very interested in your background. How did you become, because you've been a musician all your life, how did you become so immersed in music at a very young age?
Yeah, you flatter me by thinking that it's so cool that I have all these different parts of my life, because for a long time it's felt like kind of just random happenstance, like what am I doing? I'm just collecting things. But yeah, it's an interesting combination, I think. Yeah, I would say that my start of music came from my grandmother. She was a piano teacher, so she had a piano, this beautiful grand piano in her house, and so that was just ever present in my life. And so, you know, as a little kid, even though I wasn't necessarily taking formal lessons, I was always poking around on it. So there was that element. And then I started ballet, actually, I think when I was about 7 or so. And that, I think, really sparked the interest in music. And I liked the physicality of dancing, but the music, you know, those big ballets, they just have such wonderful scores. And so that really introduced me to the music, and then also some really basic elements about music theory, how to count and things like that, that's probably where it started. Shortly after ballet, like starting ballet, I started the viola. And I guess I was about 9 when I started the viola, and I was still really into ballet, actually. I had dreams of being a professional ballerina, but I injured my foot. Nobody could figure it out. It was one of those wonky, the injuries that it just hurt, but nobody could tell me why. Now I know so much more.
Oh, yeah, if you'd known Feldenkrais earlier, yeah.
It would have, yeah, I would probably be in a very different place now than I was back then, for sure. But I ended up giving up ballet after about 10 years. And then at that point, like, music was like, okay, I really like this. I'll take those kind of dreams that I'd had for ballet. And since there are a lot of similarities about the focus of the practice, the diligence that it fosters, and then the music, of course, that I dove into that.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've lost our live stream on Facebook, but that doesn't matter at all. So,
okay.
Yeah, so, okay, so good. So, how many hours did you practice as a child?
That's a good question, because it depends on whether you're talking about like when I was a little kid, because I don't really think I practiced that much. It was, you know, kind of just for fun more than anything else. But then once I started getting serious about music when I was probably about 14, that's when I really started to ramp up the number of hours that I was practicing. And really, to answer your question, I practiced too much. Like I didn't know, I wasn't very focused in how I practiced. I didn't quite know how to practice. And all I knew is that I enjoyed playing. And so I just dove into it. And like, that's just where I put all my effort, and I put way too much effort in that direction.
Yeah. Did you take lessons as a child?
I did. I started taking lessons about that same time. I think that's probably why I started practicing at around that age, because I had lessons and teachers that were, you know, expecting progress.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting, though. You had this grand piano in the home, and you didn't have people saying, well, you're not old enough. Don't touch that piano. You know, you were kind of encouraged all along the way then.
Yeah. I took actual lessons from my grandmother for a little while, but I don't know if they should count. Um, because since it was my grandmother, like I was always trying to get away with more than a normal student would be allowed. And in some ways, if you want to spin it in a positive way, the lack of practice that I did when she was my teacher actually really helped me become a very good sight reader. So being able to sit down and see a piece of music and just play it without ever having seen it before or heard it. So it made me really good at that I wouldn't practice it at all. And then I would sit down for my lesson with her and then just figure out how to play it on the fly. And then, she was my grandma.
That's a lesson, that's so invaluable, that lesson there. And also the encouragement.
Yeah, for sure.
So can you tell us then, see, from the very start, it looks like you had a combination of physicality and interest in music. So that was part of your story that developed more later too.
Yeah.
And so can you tell us, in a few words, what music means to you?
Oi, that's a great question, because I want to give the super romantic answer, like it's my life and it's my everything. But I don't know, like it's changed throughout my life, like how much it's been there. And, even like, I know we'll talk about it in a little bit, but the reason I got into physical fitness and the CrossFit certification, it came about because I was injured from playing. So there was a long time where music was a real pain for me. Like literally it was painful to play. And so it's been this kind of back and forth between I love it and then I also don't love it because, it's this duality of like trying to figure out where I am in between. And I mean, ultimately I love it. It's so wonderful a form of communication. It's just so different than anything else. It's really an art that exists in the moment, more than anything else, more than any other art forms. So, having to cultivate that awareness of the moment is huge for music. And I love that about it. But it's definitely been a love-hate relationship.
Well, that's an interesting point, because you were in pain, and I know we'll get to that a little bit here, but also you found some things that actually gave you, let's use the word correct direction. and those, so you found some principles that really lead you in the right direction, and you found some answers. But as what you just said there reveals the fact that life is a little bit more complicated than just, I found the answers. There's always more to learn, and it's a complex life.
Absolutely. And I think that there's kind of a misconception that a lot of the rest of the world has about musicians and music and their relationship to music, because if you're a professional musician, it's also your livelihood. So you started it as, most musicians do. They start as a child because they enjoy it. And then it turns into a career, and that changes the relationship so much. So, you're actually depending on this to make a living. And whereas a lot of the rest of the world thinks that you just do it because you love it, so you don't need to make money doing something you love. Like it's, this weird relationship.
Yeah. You probably have moments where you don't, where it's all yours and you don't have to depend on the money. But
absolutely.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You see people say they like to do something, and somebody suggests, well, why don't you do it for a living? They go, no, that'd ruin the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that aspect, but then there's a certain amount of once you accept that your gift is a gift of service, I think some of the mundane enters into it too.
Yes. But also accepting that it's a gift of service is kind of releasing in some ways, that like, it's okay that I charge money for this because I am providing a service for people.
Yeah. And it's okay that it's a little bit of work sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think you already answered this too, but you answered what music is to you, but what is it to the world? There be more than one answer on that.
Yeah. I know people like to talk about it being a universal language, and maybe to a certain extent it is, but that's also kind of from the perspective of Western society. So I actually have a really brilliant friend, Dr. Linda Shaver-Gleason, and she's got this great blog called Not Another Music History Cliche, and where she kind of debunks a lot of these myths around classical music. And that was one that she wrote about a couple months ago, about the universality of music, and how it's kind of this concept that's been drummed up by Western society, and it's really kind of discounted a lot of the other ethnic groups and non-Western types of music. So, you know, it is a form of communication, absolutely. But it's not this big universal thing that we want to blow it up in this romantic way to be.
So there is a saying that art imitates life. And a lot of times music has to do with the cultural spot that we're in.
Yes.
So does that have any resonance with you? Or?
Oh, for sure. I think it's really cool to see right now how the society we're living in the Me Too movement and things like that, they're really trying to open the doors of classical music now, because classical music has been one of, not the last, but one of the last frontiers of the male-dominated, white-dominated arts, like, or just any part of society, really. But we're seeing more women come into music and composers and conductors, and not just the performers, but actual like composers and conductors, like having a woman composer or conductor, or you know, a person of color in those positions. Like that's very new to our society, and that's happening more and more, and it's really, really encouraging to see, having, you know, major symphonies actually be programming these kinds of works, and having these kinds of conductors come in, and it's very new and it's exciting.
Yeah. What about do you do any vocal music?
I do, yeah. You know, it's funny you bring that up. I was always scared shitless. Sorry. I hope I can cuss. Of singing. Like singing, I grew up thinking that I was the worst singer ever. And it just terrified me. The idea of singing terrified me. It like would bring me to tears just thinking about singing in front of people. And I think it was right around the time that I started my Feldenkrais training. So it was maybe 5 years ago, or around that time. For some reason, I just decided to like get over it. It was holding me back. Like there was no reason to be afraid of this. Like, what's the worst that can happen? There are so many other horrible things happening in the world. Like this should not be holding you back. So I already was playing with a Celtic band. And I just decided to start singing with the band, like you just back up vocals a little bit here and there. And then it turned into doing one song every week that was my own song, that was a solo. And then now I am the co-lead singer of the group with my husband. So, you know, it's been kind of like little baby steps along the way for the last 5 or so years. But like I actually recorded an album. We recorded some music videos like a couple months ago, so those should be coming out pretty soon.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but it's been a really interesting progression to like have something in music that I've never taken lessons as a singer. I mean, of course, I know music. Like I have the foundations of music. I can hear. I can tune my voice to the rest of the band. I know how to, like, what kind of colors I want in the sounds that I produce. But I haven't had any formal training as a singer, and it's kind of fun in that respect, that it's my own thing, that it's not like the violin or the viola where I've had a lot of training in those. And so there's elements of all the teachings I've had go into still, appear in how I play those instruments. So I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Yeah. So you basically move past ego a little bit.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So that's another one of those things that has two sides, because it's wonderful to be able to move past ego, and you see you got something to offer, so you just go out and offer it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you can always be challenged. Even the things you're very good at, I think, make you nervous sometimes, and maybe it is a good thing they do.
Yeah. Oh, well, the nervousness is on one side it's fear, but on the other side it's excitement.
Yeah.
So, you know, like that's like they kind of feed, they're coming from the same place, but they can be channeled a little bit differently.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's such a good feeling to get out there, and I can't sing or play a musical instrument, but whatever you're doing, to get out there and feel like, well, this is flowing okay. Yeah.
It's going okay, and it doesn't even matter if it's going badly. Like if you're having fun, then who cares?
Yeah.
And people pick up on that, because I've had performances where I'm like, wow, I am having fun, but I don't think this sounds great right now. But I don't really care. And then you have audience members that come up and they say, you know, it was amazing and it's the best thing I've heard in a long time or whatever. And you're just kind of surprised that
Yeah.
and I guess I assume that they just picked up on the fact that we were enjoying ourselves more than the fact that we,
that's most important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're never going to be perfect. So
Nope.
you know your imperfections more than most people do.
Yeah. Well, and I have a theory that, you know, the more advanced we get in a skill, just the smaller our mistakes become. To
Yes.
the point where, you know, the really high level people, they sound like they make no mistakes, but to them, there are still mistakes. They're just so small and they can adjust so quickly that we, you know, people down here don't hear those things or see those things.
So you mentioned that you began to have pain playing. Now, when did that happen? It wasn't when you were playing around as a child, probably.
Well, actually, when I was 15, I started experiencing issues. So I had an audition that I was preparing for, and it was a pretty big audition for me at the time. It was like an all-state orchestra audition, and I had this really big instrument. I was putting in way too many hours, very unfocused hours, and I think one morning I woke up and I like tilted my head to pop my neck, like, which was a totally normal thing for me to do. And I didn't wrench it or anything like that, but it just, my neck didn't go back for 2 weeks. Like I walked around like this for 2 weeks, and it would hurt to try and hold my head up in a normal position. And I went ahead and played the audition anyway, and I did pretty well. And so it was kind of this like reward for the suffering that I experienced, which is, you know, kind of messed up. But I think that a lot of people experience those kinds of things where you are in pain, but you did okay. So it made the pain worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's a tricky question too, don't you think?
Yeah.
Because probably not going to go through all of our life without having any pain. And, you know, it happens. But we're going to get on to what you learned about that, I think, in a few minutes, I hope. And so anyway, what to you now, since we've talked a lot about music, what is that connection between music and life fitness, or what's the connection between music and physical fitness?
So, I mean, for one, playing an instrument or even singing is a hugely physical endeavor. And I don't think a lot of people recognize that, because they see very small movements. I mean, if you watch like a flautist or a clarinetist, or, you know, like they're really not doing a huge amount of work that you can see. I mean, at least with a string instrument with the bow and everything, like it's pretty dynamic. You can see this, you know, pretty big movement that way. But, you know, the left hand is, you know, mostly wiggling. And so you're not seeing on the surface all the work that's going into it. But it really is huge, because it's breathing, it's how you're being able to support the instrument, it's all the mental work that's going into it too. Like we were just talking about, like, is this performance going well, is it going badly, you know, like all the little head games that you start to play with yourself. Am I going to win the audition? Am I going to, you know, please the audience? So there's that idea that I think kind of goes into the physical fitness world and the athletic world, where those might be more dynamic appearing kinds of sports and physical endeavors, but there's still that kind of thread, especially in the mindset. Like, am I going to win this game? How is this next shot going to go? That kind of idea.
Yeah. So something you mentioned earlier, then things are going poorly, you think, but you're enjoying it. So how does attitude reflect into whether you have pain or not?
Ooh, that is, I think, kind of the $1 million question, isn't it? Like, that's,
Yeah.
yeah, like I think mindset is everything. And that's something that's really been one of the biggest lessons for myself, is seeing that my own mindset was contributing to the pain that I was experiencing. So, I mean, there was not just the physical pain of the overuse or misuse or whatever you want to call it, quote unquote, wear and tear, but that it was basically the shame around the pain, like that I had done something wrong because I was in pain, and that was a bad thing. Whereas pain is just trying to teach you something. Like, it's trying to communicate with you, just like music is trying to communicate with you. Like, it's trying to give you a message. It's just whether you're going to listen to that message that makes the difference.
Yeah. So how did you discover CrossFit?
Oh, fun. So that's actually a really good question, because I feel like it's kind of a rambly story. Do you remember the movie 300 with the
I
Spartans?
remember the title. I didn't see the movie.
Yeah, so it's got really buff guys in it, like, about the Spartans, the 300 Spartans that defended the thing, and, like, I don't know, they all died, I think, in the end. Super uplifting movie.
Yeah.
But so my husband is he was a Marine. He's a former Marine, and so we thought this movie was kind of fun. And at the time, they were, just, like, there was all this information around about the workout regimes that these guys for that movie were doing, and it was kind of this functional, varied fitness programs, and CrossFit around that same time was starting to become a thing. So we got into it about 10 years ago, I guess it was now. And I think we tried a class, and it was kind of fun, and, like, we didn't die. And so that was good. But it was super intimidating. It was such it's a crazy kind of program in some respects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, CrossFit had kind of a bad reputation at first.
It did. And I still, to this day, look back on the things that we were doing 10 years ago, and I'm amazed that we didn't hurt ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a promotion of the workout of the day to the point where rhabdomyolysis became an issue, and there was muscle breakdown rather than building it back up. Yeah. So hopefully that's not the case anymore.
It is much smarter than it used to be. And actually, rhabdo, they talk about rhabdo a lot, because it has been a problem, especially for the people that had been fit at one point, and then they came to CrossFit to get fit again, and they were imagining what they could do in their youth, and trying to do all that and keep up with the young people in the class. And so that's, a lot of where the rhabdo is coming, is that people just not having been familiar. They were familiar with how athletic they were back in their day, in their prime, and they were trying to come back and get fit again, and not quite clear on their boundaries.
So when we get into some of the answers that you found for your difficulties with playing music in pain, I think that raises something that's extremely important, is self-agency. So, being able to make decisions for yourself rather than, and of course, and the whole thing we're talking about, enjoying the music and so on, is it intrinsically valuable to you, or is it just something that the ego's feeding off, and other people tell you that, the rewards are external, or is it, so.
Well, and being very goal oriented, like in sports, you're, literally goal oriented. Like, there is, in most sports, some kind of goal involved. But in music, it's very goal oriented as well, because you're having to kind of put your self comfort aside so that you can accomplish a lick, or get to the end of the piece, or just do whatever. I know there are certain symphonies that you play that by the end you're just dead. I mean, it's just, you feel so tired, and it's this big brassy kind of epic ending, and as a string player you're doing this with your arm, and it's crazy, and it's just so stressful, and you're just like, how am I going to get through this? And that's just the rehearsal. Then you have to go and do the performance, like, so yeah.
Like Apollo 11, all that rehearsal that could cost you your life.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, the conductors try and be aware of this, and so they don't want to, overdo it, because they're being taxed too. I mean, conductors, like, they're very athletic as well. But you still have to rehearse it and make sure that everybody knows when they got to come in, and the one gong at the, measure 582, that guy knows when to come in. And so there's still things that you have to accomplish before the performance.
So once the performance is over and it's gone well, what is your feeling then?
Oh, I think that there's a lot of relief. I mean, that it's over. I mean, it depends. Because I remember being like the little high school player, and it was, the amazing elation of, oh, wow, we did this cool thing. And then, fast forward like 15 years later and playing the same piece with a professional orchestra, and you're like, okay, I did that again. Cool. Like.
Yeah. So it wasn't the same thing.
Yeah, but sometimes
you get that way. It seems like if you're going to continue to grow, the challenge has to continue to grow, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I remember finishing a marathon once. I'm not fast, but it was enjoyable. And I had this big smile when because you're tired, but it doesn't matter. It just felt so great, And I thought, I feel so good. I'm just going to walk around all over town and just see what's going on here. And then in a few minutes, I thought, no, I think I'll take a nap. But then that becomes, you either have to, do something a little bit different with your marathon, or you have to go up in distance or something, because it's not as exciting as it used to be.
Yeah. Well, and for a lot of professional musicians, they get done with that concert and they got to run to another one.
Oh yeah.
So like or they got to go home and take care of their kids, or go pick up their kids from school, or, do whatever. But like, there's, it's like, wow, that was a great performance. Okay, back to life. Like, I gotta get back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life is always there. It's whenever you accomplish something, you have to find something else to accomplish. But on the other hand, you have to go back to life too. So yeah, those things fade, but new challenges await.
Yes. Well put.
So you have a beautifully developed webinar to explain the solutions that you did find to playing in pain. Would you like to take us through your 5 epiphanies?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
So I know the first epiphany, what you do is you try to shatter people's idea that they know everything.
Yeah, I know. I'm so subtle, right? Yeah.
Well, it's important. I think just a very important. I found that you can't work with people unless they understand that they're going to have to do something different than they've been doing. And unless they make a commitment to it, it's not even worth trying.
Yes. Yes.
So I think you set us up for that. So your first epiphany?
Yeah. Well, everything you know about pain is wrong. Like
So that gets it out there. Yeah.
It gets it out there. Like I think it gets people's attention. Yeah. Cause, I hesitate to say that we've been misled by the medical communities and the pharmacological communities, but
I could say it, yeah.
Yeah, I think there is an element of that. I mean, I even still see pain reliever commercials where it's like, it really sounds like it's promising that you can take this pill and then get back to whatever was causing your pain. Like, no, like, don't take, it's not the message of take this pill and then rest. It's, take this pill and then get back to, golf or whatever it is that, was making you, feel like you needed to take the pill.
Innately, we want to connect to the things that are most important to us. And golf might be very, very important to somebody.
Yes.
But we want to take the quick, easy way without going too deep too.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other point that I make in that epiphany is that golfer, and in my epiphany, I'm talking about more musicians, but you know, in the case of the golfer, he may decide that in addition to the pill, he needs some kind of little ergonomic accessory, like, you know, new shoes or a different kind of glove, or maybe he's going to buy this fancy club that's supposed to, you know, whatever, it's going to help his swing so that he won't be in pain anymore. And that's a great idea. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but if your closet is kind of a graveyard for all those kinds of accessories, then you need to start looking at yourself as opposed to your gear.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, you buy those. See, I think some of them are actually a good idea.
Some of them, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I once had plantar fasciitis, and it was the shoes that were causing it. They were so tight on my feet that my feet, all I had to do was switch shoes, and that solved that. Now, later on, I had it again. It was because of the way I was running.
Yeah.
But so actually that, you know, that is a good idea to examine some of those things. But I love the point you made there that you've tried all these things and they work a little bit for a while, and then you just throw them away because that obviously it solves things. So you have to go deeper. And the reward for going deeper is, wow, I never knew the little things could make such a big difference. It's astounding.
Well, and then you can go back to those ergonomic tools, that gear, and it's going to work better for you too.
Yeah, it will.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so when I was in the midst of pain, I got into grad school, and my teacher convinced me that I needed a new instrument, which she wasn't wrong. I agree still with her that I needed the new instrument, and it was a smaller instrument. The idea was it would be a little easier for me to play, like with my frame, and it was a good idea, but I got the instrument. I paid, you know, $20,000 for the instrument. It's a beautiful instrument, but I was still in pain. Like, there was more that needed to change than just the instrument. Like, I couldn't fully rely on the instrument to solve all my problems.
That's right. Yeah. So your second epiphany, what is that?
Uh-oh. Oh no, I don't think I wrote it down.
Well, okay. So I think I have it here. It is expand your movement to support your technique.
Right. Yes.
So in other words, you have to change something about your movement to support what you want to do and what you're doing.
Yeah. I think we all, I don't think you have to be a movement expert or a kinesiologist or anything like that to know that you can't expect an infant, like a newborn, to use a fork properly, right? Like to eat with a fork. That's just like, if you were to suggest that to somebody, they would tell you you're insane, right? So an infant has to learn all this movement to get to the point where it can really manipulate the fine motor muscles to be able to use that fork. But it's a long process, and actually a pretty short amount of time, arguably. But it's a pretty, you know, involved process for them to learn how to do that. And it involves all this coordinated kind of foundational movement to get to them to that point. But it seems as though we get to a certain age where we're able to really cultivate the fine motor patterns that we kind of forget about everything else. So we get into school, we start writing with a pencil. They still do that, right? People write with pencils, I think.
Maybe.
I don't know. I do. I like pencils. I
do too.
But, you know, they type, we're sitting in chairs, we're really cultivating our attention, kind of focusing it into these fine motor patterns. And then we're foregoing all of the big foundational movements, and we're suffering because of that. And you see this with musicians all the time, but even non-musicians, you know, people that are kind of like the desk jockeys or whatever they call them now, that they're losing those foundational patterns that support the intricate movement. Yeah.
So really, if let's say that you're standing in such a way where you're using a lot of muscle and you're not using the wonderful support that you can get from your bones.
Yes.
So you're using a lot of muscle, and then you try to play an instrument, and now you can't move very well because you're not balanced on your skeleton. You're already using up most of your muscle, and so anything in the middle of yourself that could support your movement is not available. And you're talking about that sort of thing. Sitting at a desk, for instance, if you do that too much, you really lose your ability to use your hip flexors, use your glutes, things like that. And you may find climbing stairs or hiking a lot more difficult than if you were spending more time, doing whole body movements and not so much immobilizing yourself on your pelvis there.
Absolutely. And I don't know how many times a week I see someone in a Facebook like violin or viola related group where it's a teacher that's trying to get help for, they have a picture of a student and they're trying to get help for correcting their bow hold. And so often you see the student in like the rest of their body in the background in this like kind of like sway back, belly out posture, like little kids stand, like especially little kids that haven't gotten a lot of movement in their, as much movement as maybe it would be good for them. But they're standing in this way that they, like you're describing, they cannot support themselves on their bones. They're almost entirely on their ligaments at that point. And their bow hold is like the last concern. It's if you were to get them stacked nicely in their bones so that their muscular system isn't just afraid it's going to fall over, that then the bow hold would take care of itself.
Yeah.
For the most part, like that would not be an issue. But that's I've actually tried telling this to some teachers and gotten in some arguments where they just couldn't see that at all. Like, why would that matter? That shouldn't matter. And it's like, well,
if you're standing in strain, you're almost in pain already when you start to do something. So now we've covered music a lot and we've covered CrossFit a little bit, but I don't think you've told our listeners, if they don't know, what are some of the basic movements that you might do in CrossFit? In other words, that if you don't know, you wouldn't really have the mental picture of.
What the hell is CrossFit? So they, it's a constantly varied. Let's see, I should know the whole definition, but it's escaping me at the moment. Like constantly varied functional fitness performed at like time intervals, or I can't remember. I'm a terrible CrossFit coach. But the idea of it is that you are doing workouts at varied time lengths. So you might do a workout one day that's 40 minutes, or in the next day you might do a workout that is only 5 minutes, or then the next day you might do a workout that is focused mostly on just doing one really heavy lift. And so in essence, the workout is really only like a couple seconds if you're just focusing on trying to work up to a really heavy lift. And then you're doing those workouts. There are movements you're cycling through, but it's always varied in terms of what the movements are that are gonna show up in that workout of the day. And then the rep scheme changes as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what people may not know is that it encompasses so much. It may even encompass a little bit of running.
Oh yeah. So and
also, you haven't mentioned, get this in people's mind about what this really is. You're going to do a lot of maybe deadlifting. I love that.
Yes. So there's a lot of, there could potentially on any given day in a workout be barbell lifts. So that would include the deadlift, like you just mentioned, back squats, front squats, overhead squats, even Olympic lifting. So
power movements. Yeah.
Yeah. So even occasionally there's a bench press even thrown in there, but there might be some cleans or jerks or snatches. There are kind of those cardio movements like rowing and running, jump rope, those kind of cyclical movements. And then let's see what else. There's body weight movements. So you're going to see push-ups and pull-ups, muscle-ups for those who can tackle those, kettlebells, which are totally my favorite.
Yeah, Turkish sit-ups.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many variations on that.
Yeah, and then swings and kettlebell snatches and
interesting. There's lots of variations there. Anyway, so now people have the idea that this is not going to the gym, sitting on your cycle there and recumbent cycle and reading a novel.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's
so
a little bit.
I think we've got a picture of that, and Right.
And I have to say that that's actually one of the things that I really love the most about CrossFit is that smattering of different movements, because I was really sick of before I started CrossFit, I was really tired of like just doing the circuits of the machines in the gym, or, you know, the recumbent, or the, what is that thing called? The elliptical, like that kind of stuff. And also like whenever I would try and like move over into the barbell side of the gym, or like with the free weights, like people would look at me funny, because at the time, like a woman doing that, obviously she needs help, right? Like that was always kind of the thing. It's like, you could not be a woman on the free weight side of the gym and be left alone in peace to do your thing. Like some man would always come over and try and instruct you on the proper way to do something. So CrossFit for me was nice because I could have space to play with all those free weights. And then also it was just that huge smattering of different kinds of movements. It was so exciting that you got to learn all these different ways, and how all those things, so how you deadlift, or let's say how you clean, is, you know, in some respects very similar to how you do a box jump. Like there are these patterns, these kind of biomechanical patterns that carry over between these things that you know, maybe at first glance you wouldn't think they're related, but how you approach them and how you're generating the power or the core stability is very similar.
Yeah, it is. So the hip hinge movement is very important, but we won't get into that probably.
No, that's okay.
even landing off of a box jump, you know, it's very similar to how you would start a lift.
Yeah.
Especially a power lift where you're going to really stretch up here like this, and hard to describe in words. But anyway, so now we've got a picture of those two things. And before we go on to the next of the 5 epiphanies, I don't think I've asked you, and it would fit in well before the next epiphany. What's the Feldenkrais method?
Oh, yeah. So I feel like
the most difficult question.
That is another $1 million question. Because if you ask 10 practitioners, 10 Feldenkrais practitioners, you are going to get 10 different answers. Like that is just the way the method is. On the surface, it's improving movement patterns. Like you're doing different kinds of movement with intention and attention so that you can learn to do something better. So you're learning these kind of functional patterns, and a lot of the lessons start out with these really, really small, intricate movements, and some of those lessons stay with the small, intricate movements, and then other lessons you're in a headstand by the end, you know, or you're learning how to fall out of a headstand, or doing judo rolls. Like that was always my favorite series, the judo roll series. But we have found that with the attention and intention in learning these small movements, that there's a bigger and deeper process at play and a bettering of the person, that it's not just improving how you move. Like if you improve how you move, obviously you're improving how you move. But if you improve how you move, you're also improving how you think and how you sense and how you feel. And you're starting to regulate all these things so that it's helping you become more of yourself and having your whole self work towards the same goal. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Boy, it does, because you're engaging more deeply with yourself. You're also engaging much more deeply with the world around you then.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I've seen with a lot of musicians and athletes alike, like I described earlier, with this kind of goal-oriented being, this binary kind of way of thinking of, you know, like good or bad, like I won or I didn't win, that you are often, your mind is telling you go, like you have to do this thing, you have to finish the piece, you have to win the game, blah, blah, blah. But then your body is in pain and it's telling you stop, please stop. And so you have just kind of this juxtaposition, like one part of you is going that way and the other part is going the other way, and they're not harmonious, to, you know, like pun intended, I guess.
Yeah. So we really are goal oriented in this society. You know, don't mess up, get your job done perfect and all that. But There was a football coach that I know of, I won't mention his name, but he used to have a saying that I like. It was, do the right things and good things will happen.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's consistent with a lot of other coaches' philosophy also. But, and then there's a saying that all Feldenkrais practitioners know, but the general public may not know. It's wonderful. If you know what you're doing, you can do what you want.
Yes.
So it's always a matter of knowing a little bit more of what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely.
Developing more skill. So your next epiphany, I think, fits right in after that. Align your mind and your body.
Right. Yes.
So what can you say about that?
Well, I think it's really common for us to talk about the mind body. And for myself in this webinar, like I almost hesitated putting that in, because if we talk about them being separate, it assumes that at one point they were apart, right? So, and that gets a little tricky because people really want to talk about just their body, and they don't want to talk about the mental connections to what they're physically feeling. And so I know it's always been kind of considered woo-woo to talk about the mind-body connection, but I think if neuroscience is teaching us anything at this point, it's that it's not woo-woo at all. Like, our body is this external kind of projection of everything going on in our mind, and our mind is this inward collection of everything that we're experiencing in our environment, how we move and what we're touching and what we're seeing and all those things. So I find that epiphany kind of helps bridge this gap, because in the Feldenkrais method, we don't like talking about the body. That's the thing that we kind of avoid. We want to talk about the person, that we're directing the person in these lessons. But I think that you still have to kind of communicate with people closer to what the common language is, which is mind and body. So finding a way, in my mind, to make them more harmonious, like I said earlier, aligning them so that they're both headed to the same goal, that they're, like you said, you can do what you want if you know what you're doing.
Yeah. So they actually are the same thing. However, our conscious mind isn't necessarily aligned with our body and with our unconscious.
Yes.
So that's where we get into a little bit of trouble. And that creates a dichotomy within ourselves, not just our cultural philosophy, but
oh yeah, for sure.
There's a real world conflict there.
I think about even just several years ago, there was that meme circling the internet with the dress that was the blue and gold. Was it blue and gold dress? Is that right? No, it was blue and black. But the picture, most everybody that saw this picture saw a white, and what was the coloring? The dress was blue and black. So yeah, everybody else was seeing white and gold. And there was something about the lighting in this picture that produced this, the unconscious brain was interpreting it in another way than it was actually appearing. And there was this big uproar about it on social media, and to the point where it was appearing on like major news networks. It was being reported on in these like major places. But it was this really fascinating thing to see that, yeah, if you changed the lighting in the picture a little bit, then your brain would start to see it in the color it was meant to be, or that it was in reality. But like, everybody was so upset about this thing.
Yeah.
It seemed to offend people that other people didn't see it the same way as they did.
Ah.
and so it was kind of this actual, I don't know, real time kind of almost what happens in our brains, for the individual. Like, one part of the brain, like you're talking about, like the conscious brain is saying, nuh-uh, like it is this way. And then the unconscious brain is like, well, I don't know though, is it?
Yeah, so that brings up a whole new topic of listening, actually, getting more sensitive to yourself. And it's very hard to listen to other people because they do come from another place, and you have to take the time to see what that other place is.
Right. And like you said earlier about letting the ego go, that sometimes you're just wrong and you're not seeing things in a certain way. And that's okay. Like that was what I thought was so cool, is it's like, everybody's kind of right here. That, you know, that's not necessarily like it, just because you saw this picture in one way that was different than another person didn't mean that you were a bad person.
No, there's another way to perceive it. Yeah. Very complex. So your next epiphany, this is a good one. Pain is not your enemy.
Yes.
So I take it that you put these together for yourself and your own experience as a process. They kind of dawned on you together, maybe, but one at a time, or a process of both, one at a time and together.
Yeah.
How did you see that? How did that develop?
Oh, well, you know, I have this webinar because I started working with a business coach, actually. And this was kind of part of their process for helping broadcast your message.
Oh.
Yeah. And so this is kind of their formula in some respects that you're tailoring to your own experience. And so I thought this was totally brilliant. And I mean, I have to say that I've learned these epiphanies throughout the years, but it was such an amazing experience to sit down and write this webinar, because I actually had to think about it, because these were things that I felt like I learned internally. And I've been teaching to people over the last 5 years or so, but I had never really expressed them out loud in this way, that like these were the things that I learned that helped me on this path. Like,
and now you're a better teacher.
Yeah, oh God, yeah. I'm so grateful for just this formula to be able to easily express this message, because I don't think I could have done it without. I mean, formulas they can be confining, but they can also be a constraint that is helping you to kind of narrow your focus and deliver an idea, and that's just been so helpful.
Yeah, that's actually a question I had. That the webinar is done so well, and the way you wrote it and spoke it is very clear, very, very decisive, and very, very good. So you actually had a little bit of help with the overall structure, but then you had to sit down and think about it. So when I wrote my book, I found that, I wanted to address some issues, but then I had to think through the complexities of them, and that made me really have some things that I didn't have before I had to think about it so much. So so you're actually I think most of our listeners would have some bones in their body that make them want to help other people, and so this is quite instructive. And we'll come back to that, I think, in one of the other epiphanies. But so pain is not your enemy, and that was a discovery that you made, because what do we think at first? I want to get rid of this pain. Of course we do. Mm-hmm. And that's not wrong.
Nope, not at all. But like I said earlier about pain having shame around it, that I know myself, I experienced this, and just about every person that I've ever worked with that's in pain or been in pain, there is shame and guilt around the pain, that they have somehow done something wrong to bring this upon themselves. And it's showing them that it's not their fault.
Yeah.
That they have to learn to listen to the pain so that it can be a teacher, as opposed to it just being a way to inform them that they've just messed up and, they're going to be this way for the rest of their lives. And it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about that binary mindset, that, the yes or no, good or bad, that, if you have pain, this is bad, but it really isn't. Like you said earlier, pain is a part of life. So you can't let the fear and the shame and the guilt kind of keep you in that place. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, because what you've done is you've taken a basic awareness that people have that there's something wrong, and you clarified it for them and into what is my body teaching me.
Yes, exactly. Well, and being in this binary mindset, this was the point that I meant to say, and I keep forgetting to say it. this binary mindset, if we're thinking about good and bad all the time, if we're going to succeed or we're going to fail, that basically means you're just living in failure all the time, because you're either afraid of it. You either have failed, or if you've succeeded in this moment, but there's still that fear of failure, that the next time, the next opportunity, the next gig or whatever, you could fail in that moment. So if you're only ever thinking that you're going to fail or you're going to succeed, then ultimately you're always just living in fear of failure. And pain is really not much different. If you're living in a world where you just think, great, I am not in pain, or God, this sucks, I am in pain, and you're only thinking about these two things, that not being in pain and in pain, then you're going to be always worried about being in pain. Because being not in pain, you're like, well, but the pain could come back. Like, I remember being in pain last week and that really sucked, and I don't want that to happen again, but it's cool, I'm not in pain right now, but maybe I'm going to be in pain next week.
Yeah, then there'll be more to learn next week.
Yeah. But it's like, but that's only if you're not looking at it from a learning experience. So if you're always being afraid, if you're not looking at it as learning, then you're always just afraid of being in pain. But I like to foster this kind of dynamic mindset, I guess you'd call it, where it's fluid. The pain is a teacher. Failure is a teacher. Like, these aren't bad things necessarily, because you can't have one without the other. You can't have failure. You can't have a success without failure. And you can't have no pain without some pain. And just like with music, you can't have sound without silence. Like, these are all kinds of, the dualities of life.
Yeah. So you probably remember what your fifth epiphany in the webinar is, and it's a great webinar. I'm going to recommend it to people when you get a chance to tell them how to connect to that. But what's your fifth epiphany?
That one I do remember. Yes. Get help from someone who understands. Yes.
Yeah. So one of the great things about the Feldenkrais method is that you can help yourself. But on the other hand,
it helps to have a little guidance, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I find that I got interested in the Feldenkrais method through an injury, which many people find that inroad. Mm-hmm. But then I found that, I studied a little bit, and I found I couldn't really understand it. And you get some guidance, and then a lot more guidance, and then
it's like an onion, right? You just peel away the pieces. I feel like I'm learning things. I never stop learning things, especially about the method. It's so deep.
So what's the importance of people finding a mentor or a guide?
It's not just a mentor or a guide. It's somebody in that capacity that understands where you've been. Like, they've already fallen in that ditch that maybe you're about to fall in. And so they can kind of help you learn how to get out of that situation. It's the idea that you are supported by somebody that knows where you are and where you've been. And I know for myself, in trying to heal my own injuries, I had a horrible time. I think it took me way longer than it should have, because I was just not able to find the kinds of people that I needed to support me. Like, you go to a doctor and you say, well, my arm hurts. And they say, well, why? Why do you think it hurts? And you say, well, because I play this large instrument that's shaped like a violin that you probably don't even know the name of, but that's cool. I am a musician. That is why I hurt right now. And they laugh at you. Like, that's the kind of response you get when you're a musician and you say you're in pain. Like, even in the music community, it's something of shame again. So, you either get people who say, well, I don't experience pain when I play, so I don't understand your situation. Or you get the people who say, the teachers who say, well, yeah, that's a part of it. Like, pain is just a part of music. Like, you just have to deal with it. Like, just get over it, essentially. And that's because they're in pain. Yeah. So, but they're not willing to look at the issues and figure out a solution. So, yeah.
And again, whenever you've listened to what your body has to teach you, and you've come up with an improvement, then you always know how you got that improvement.
Yes.
And you're more able to help other people then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, where on the internet can people now before we go there, I want to say, so you had a structure for your webinar.
Yeah.
You had a business coach and so on. So how can we generalize this whole procedure that you outlined in your webinar so that anybody could use it? Just give me some general ideas on how you would generalize the principles so that people could use that to improve themselves and eventually help others.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I had a business coach, and if you really, I mean, if somebody's listening to this and they really want to understand the process, then, I mean, the thing you do is you go to my mentor, and her name is Geeta Nadkarni. Geeta, Geeta, and Nadkarni, Nadkarni. And she's amazing. She is a brilliant, brilliant person. She is just amazing at messaging. Like, she can take what you're trying to say, stumbling in words, and just like succinctly summarize it, and boom, it's just it. She's amazing. But one of the things that I love that she says is that we teach what we most seek to learn. And yeah, and I think it's a beautiful thing because it's so totally true. And everyone has their own journey that they've learned from and their own epiphanies. And it's in some respects a matter of just sitting down and thinking about what those epiphanies were for you. But it's not, and I know for myself in writing this webinar, it was really hard not to just teach and lecture in the way that, like, let me just give you all the answers. Because in some respects, when you're trying to interface with that potential client who could come and learn from you, they don't need all your information at once. Like, this is, you know, that's overload. Like, our society is on information overload as it is. So I love these epiphanies because it is a way for somebody to also get to know me and how I think, more than anything else. I mean, I lay out what I think are really important points in the journey to heal pain, but then they're also getting a sense of how I think.
Yeah. So I find that really fascinating. By the way, do you have a pencil?
Possibly, yes.
I find that really fascinating because I think a lot of you teach the things that you've experienced and know, but you teach the things that you most need to learn. That's a wonderful idea. I have to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, like I said,
because you're an evolving person, and what you have learned is probably what you still need to learn the most.
Absolutely. I mean, I know for myself, you know, I tout, you know, self-awareness and self-trust and self-confidence and self-care. And even just like a month ago, I realized that I was in this kind of vicious pattern of getting to the end of the day and being just so horribly hungry because I'd skipped lunch because I felt like I had to work, and there was this perfectionist tendency going on there, that I'd get to the end of the day and I'd just be so overwhelmed with hunger and fatigue that my version of self-care was just to order food. Like, I just was just
yeah, you're at that point then, because when you get that low on energy and blood sugar, you've gone that long, it's really difficult to get it balanced again. It's like your main task for the rest of the day.
Right, exactly. And so I was thinking that my taking care of myself was just making dinner easy and going out and getting it. But it just dawned on me like a month ago that really the self-care is just allowing myself to take time to eat some lunch. Like, that's the actual self-care part. It's not this, you know, the kind of, what would you call it? Like, the word is escaping me at the decadence of getting food brought to you or something like that. That's not self-care. Like, in that capacity, that is not self-care. Sometimes it is. I won't say it's never, you know, self-care, but yeah.
So you just gave us a resource, and I don't know if everybody could catch it, but could you write down her website and just hold it up for people, and we'll let that stay there for a couple seconds, and if anybody's interested, they could actually have that resource.
Yeah, let's see. So here, let's see.
Because I know you have the capacity to share your screen, but that would take longer than just writing this down, I think.
Right. Well, actually, her website is actually easier probably than saying her name. So it's impactwithinfluence.com.
Okay.
.com, but here, I'll hold it up. Let's see. Does that work?
Impactwithinfluence.com.
Yeah.
Very, very good. So I think anybody who's interested could see that.
Yeah, and you can go, and she has her own webinar. It's the same kind of formula, but you know, she's a business coach, so she's using that formula to promote her business coaching. But she's brilliant, like I said, you know, so her webinar is just like something magical, honestly. Yeah.
Now, how can people reach you online, especially musicians that have pain, or anyone who wants to learn more about your story? How can they reach you online?
Yeah, so you can go to my website if you want to watch the webinar. The webinar is at performwithoutpain.com, and that's performwithoutpain.com. And then if you want to find me, you can just find me on Facebook. Dr. Rachel White Galvin is my page, and through there you can contact me. Yeah, it's nice and simple.
Okay. So that's all they need to do. And I'm going to really recommend that you watch that webinar. It's really well done. And it would be difficult for you not to learn something out of it.
I'm so happy to hear that. Like that, I can't tell you how much that means coming from another Feldenkrais practitioner, especially like trying to take these really amazingly deep ideas and condense them down into a way that like I feel like I can communicate in this medium. That really means a lot. Thank you.
So Rachel, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you being on. It was wonderful to interview. I enjoyed it very much. And I think our listeners are going to learn a lot from this.
Oh, thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate the great conversation.
So if you don't mind, before I end the recording, I'm going to mention my book.
Yes, please.
So if anyone wants to delve more deeply into the subject of life fitness versus physical fitness only, you can read The Aware Athlete, How the Wild Origins of Our Human Nature and the New Science of Neuroplasticity Are Redefining Fitness. You can find that on Amazon. So I'm going to thank everyone for listening, and we're going to end the recording here, and I'm going to thank you again, Rachel.